Greetings, it is I, David Stewart, your friendly neighborhood corporate shill, Russian agent, thought criminal, whatever you want me to be. No doubt by now you've heard the tale, spreading like fire through grass across the land, of a poor 69-year-old Asian doctor and grandpa, David Dow, being forcibly removed by United Airlines when he refused to give up his seat in an overbooked flight, and suffering injuries in the process. But is that the real story? Is that really what happened? Let's find out. I think this is a really, really great example of how the narrative can control people's perceptions and how they write their memories. Because if the story I told at the beginning, even though I do it with a sarcastic tone, that's what a lot of people are going to think actually happened. And I've seen a bunch of news stories that all have told a narrative, and people just sort of fill in the gaps from whatever facts that they get sort of left over. So the first one, did United Airlines forcibly remove David Dow from an airplane? And the answer is actually no. United Airlines did not. He was removed by Chicago aviation officers, which is a little mini police force that runs at the O'Hare Airport in Chicago. So United Airlines did not pull him off their flight. United Airlines called the police, and the police removed him from their flight. And I haven't seen that fact except in a couple of circumstances that I'll demonstrate to you. So there's the first one. The other one is, was David Dow a poor, mistreated grandpa? And the answer is maybe, sort of. Was he a doctor? Sort of. Let's find out a little bit. Okay, so first of all, as soon as you get away from something like the New York Times, what you get is a little bit of a different perspective on reality. So I'm going to point you to a New York Times article that I think is a really, really interesting read, in that it is a complete manipulation of people's emotions and reality. And I might do a follow-up video that just completely goes through that particular article, more or less paragraph by paragraph, and explains what they're doing to control people's thoughts and change how their emotional reaction to this is. Basically, it's a piece about people's reactions. It's about, people are having a bad reaction. It's about how people are reacting to the news. It's not actually about news at all, which just reinforces a narrative and allows you to avoid talking about the facts. And it's full of things like anecdotes and just random people saying how they feel to provoke empathy responses. It's quite a bad piece of journalism. And you guys should be aware of how even the New York Times, which used to be considered a laudable standard bearer for the profession of journalism, how far things have changed. Now, let's look a little bit closer to where this happened. Let's look at the Chicago Sun-Times, and then you're going to get a much clearer picture of what actually happened. So, viral video hurts the chance Chicago aviation officers will be armed. So what we have here is that United Airlines didn't remove him. Chicago aviation officers removed him. And there was apparently some amount of ongoing debate as to whether they should be able to carry like firearms, whether they should be armed the way normal police officers were. And it looks like they're saying, well, that's really not going to happen now because of how big this screw up was, like how bad the PR image was for having to pull this guy out of his seat. And they say, they make a good point multiple times in here that most of the time when somebody has to leave an overbooked flight or doesn't get to go on it, they're compensated on some level, that it should have been handled at the gate, not after people were seated. That is also probably true, but that actually doesn't interact with the legal culpability there. So we know who actually did it. It wasn't actually United Airlines. United Airlines, this would be the equivalent of, and my friend Kelly said this on Facebook, he's a bartender, and if he needs somebody to get out of the bar and they won't get out, and he calls the cops, and the cops hurt the guy in the process of dragging him out of the bar, is he at fault? It was the cops that did it. And I'll talk about sort of percentage of liability maybe towards the end of this. But what's important to note is that United Airlines didn't actually do this. United Airlines didn't beat anybody up. This was done by a third party that is a government agency. This is not a private organization that did this at all. And you're not going to really see that fact put in. What they say is this man was removed. They use that passive voice. You got to be careful with that passive voice. man was removed from United Airlines. Well, who removed him? Oh, it should say, Chicago aviation officers forcibly removed man from United Airlines flight, is what it should be. Now, the other thing is, if you buy a ticket, are you guaranteed to fly on that plane? The answer is no. And the reason that the answer is no is simply that it doesn't apply. When you buy a ticket to anything, what you're actually not buying is the service. You're not paying for the service in advance so much as you're paying for access to the service in advance. So if you buy a concert ticket, it's the same thing. You buy a concert ticket to go see Megadeth, you show up at the venue, and the concert's canceled because Dave Mustaine's passing a kidney stone. Now, this is totally fiction because I know for a fact Dave Mustaine has actually played concerts whilst passing kidney stones. So keep that in mind for if whenever you're questioning taking a sick day, think of Dave Mustaine, who passes kidney stones while playing concerts. Anyway, so, maybe he's too sick to play the concert. They cancel the concert. What they do is they reschedule the concert for a later date, and then your ticket's good for that later date. It's the same thing with a flight. You show up to the flight, they're like, we're overbooked, we don't have room. We have to deny you service. We're going to put you on the next flight, and to keep you happy, we'll do some other stuff. Now, when you buy that ticket, it actually limits their liability, and you can read on that. Usually, there's like a big print up that goes with it whenever you buy an airline ticket that says, like, in certain circumstances, they can basically not have to put you on that flight that you've bought access to. And one of those circumstances is if the flight is overbooked, or if they have to put somebody else on the flight for some other reason. So no, you actually are not buying the service in advance. You're merely buying access to it. And there's many other ways that can happen, right? You could pay your hairdresser in advance and show up on a Saturday and she's sick and you don't get your hair cut. You're not guaranteed to receive service at the time at which you booked it for anything outside of the airlines as well. So it'd be special pleading. We talked about that. It'd be special pleading to say, well, it needs to apply with airlines because it's scheduled. Flights get canceled. Sometimes you show up, the flight's canceled. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you can sue them for millions of dollars because the flight was canceled. It doesn't work that way. You're merely buying access ahead of time. You're not buying the service itself. It's still a PR nightmare for United. Don't get me wrong. Because there's certain ways that people are used to being bumped from flights, which is, they get a hotel if they have to go the next day, or they get on the next flight and they get $50 to go buy lunch or something. And a lot of people are usually pretty cool about doing that. Depending on where I'm at, I'm usually cool about doing that, especially if I'm flying alone. I don't really care about getting there a couple hours later, whatever. Oh, cool. I'll go have some wine at the wine bar or whatever. But the whole idea of compensating people is to get them to volunteer to do it. And the reason that they overbook planes is because, I'll just talk about this now. So they overbook planes basically because the cost of flying a plane from one location to another, there's a very narrow range of cost involved. It's almost fixed. It's not quite fixed, and the reason is because if you're flying an empty plane, it costs less than if you're flying a full plane because it weighs less, so it requires less fuel to operate the machine. But you have the same amount of labor whether every seat's filled or every seat's not filled, and you have the same amount of, or you have a narrow range of fuel that you're going to use whether every seat's filled or every seat's not filled. You have the same cost of maintenance over time. You have the same depreciation of the asset over time. So the costs are pretty much static for one flight, or they're at such a narrow range as they might as well be static. So airlines want to put as many people on that flight as possible, and you overbook the flights knowing that some people are going to fall out. That some people are going to have to cancel ahead of time. Some people are not going to show up. And so you'll have a full flight. You'll be guaranteed to have that full flight. And by overbooking that flight, it allows you to basically offer the ticket at a lower expense, to sell more tickets, which is what you want to do. So there's two ways that you can have more money as a business. You can sell the same amount of goods at a higher price, or you can sell more goods at the same price or a lower price, right? You can sell more or less depending on how those things work out. And so the way the market prefers cheap travel. Generally, it's why people put up with coach seating is I'm getting there fast enough that I could put up with 4 hours of discomfort. And the market tends to value that a lot more than they value a guaranteed service. That's just the way that it's worked out. So one of the things that you'd get is if you did away with people getting bumped on flights, you would probably end up with a little bit higher cost of travel, and it would affect the airline industry in that sort of way if you were to make it illegal. The other thing is, like, another part of the narrative that is United like super special in what they do with this, and the answer is no. All the airlines do this. People get bumped all the time. American Airlines does the exact same thing, and if there's somebody who's a belligerent passenger, security, either the police, the local police, or someone from DHS has to come get the person. In this case, it was a different government agency that people are not aware of outside of Chicago, but you go to the local news and people are very aware of how this works. So as soon as you get rid of that layer of, like, it's far enough away that I don't understand the local politics, you go back to local politics, it all starts to sort of come into focus. That's not to say United Airlines handled this correctly. I'll talk about percentage of liability at the end. I think I already mentioned that. Let's take a look at some other things. Is David Dow a poor old 69-year-old grandpa that we should probably feel sorry for? And maybe. Here's a great picture of him getting hauled off. So let's look at what Team Z figured out. So Team Z figured out he was on the World Series of Poker, where he won, $117,000, and he declared $234,000 in poker payouts. Now, I don't think it's bad to play poker. However, he did get convicted of, or he did get charged with 98 felony counts of illegally prescribing and trafficking painkillers. As a doctor. So he had his medical license suspended, and that's when he was in the World Series of Poker. So when he had his medical license suspended. He's had multiple convictions of that. Right now, I think he's still licensed. He's licensed to practice internal medicine in an outpatient facility 1 day a week. So he's sort of a doctor. He's a doctor that has been convicted multiple times of basically being a drug dealer and using his medical license to deal drugs to people. Not that that is too much different from a lot of doctors. And don't let the bodies distract you from the truth. Ignore the butts. Okay, they're just there to draw your eyes away from what you should be thinking about. TMZ's they're basically about sensationalism, but they are going to dig up dirt on people. And so, no, we're not talking about somebody who's like super special, sympathetic figure. And multiple people have talked about his willingness to just do his own thing, and that's in the TMZ article, regardless of how it affects other people. So this isn't somebody who was like they just showed up to him and hauled him off. Is that they're like, we need to, you've been drawn, the lottery has drawn you, or whatever it is. And then he's like, I'm not going to leave. You're going to have to beat me up and carry me out. And that's really most of the facts that you need to know about this, which writes a different narrative than what you've probably been told about this. A very, very different narrative, one in which you have a not such a nice guy who's being belligerent on a flight and has to be removed by government agents, by police officers, essentially. And then everyone gets mad at United Airlines for doing what they basically have to do to have their business run. Now, that I'm not saying that they handled it the best. Obviously, there's better ways to handle it. But the idea that this is an evil, greedy corporation, beating a guy up on a plane, that actually is not. That is not reality, and that's not the way. That's not the way that you should hopefully interpret it. Now, why is the media pushing this particular narrative? Well, I think it plays into sort of their politics and the belief in like big bad evil corporations, of which they are never a part, by the way, right? The New York Times or the Associated Press is not a big bad corporation as far as they're concerned. Only things like United Airlines are big bad corporations. The other thing is it's really easy to get people to feel things about airlines. No one really likes to fly anymore. I don't know anyone who enjoys flying. The act of having to fly is usually considered really obnoxious and painful at this point. Now, if you went back to the 1990s, there's probably more people who enjoyed flying. But pretty much everyone I know considers it a tremendous hassle and they want to avoid it. And that includes me. Basically, if I can avoid flying to a location, I will avoid flying to a location. The trade-off is that you get there fast and it's pretty safe, right? So you get there fast and safely. That's really, really what you want versus having to drive somewhere. Even though driving is nice and efficient around town, it really sucks for going across the country or flying overseas or something like that. So that's the big trade-off there. Most people don't like to fly, and the reason I don't like to fly is I don't like security. I don't like waiting in line for hours at security. I don't like the Department of Homeland Security wanting to look through my bag and like give me a prostate exam every time I want to get on a plane and fly somewhere. And now that I have like metal in my head, it's just going to be 10 times more annoying to deal with that, which sucks. I'm not looking forward to. I'm supposed to go on vacation next week. I'm not looking forward to the flight part. So people already have these really negative emotions surrounding flight because it's inconvenient while they're there. It's very convenient considering all other things. That's why they still choose to do it. But it's not very fun. You're in a cramped little space with people who are coughing. It's noisy. It hurts your ears maybe. Going through security is a drag. Just doing the whole thing, it's kind of a drag. So since people already have that negative emotion, you just kind of poke at it, and then people get really, really angry. They're like, oh, and you're going to remember something bad that happened to you on some airlines. Like, I remember I went on Southwest one time, and they didn't let me carry on my bag, and they made me check in. It cost me an extra $70, and I hate the airlines. So it's a really easy way to manipulate people, and it's also good for promoting their little line about the big bad corporations, which is not to say that like these airlines are operating under a set of legal guidelines that they don't have a whole lot of direct control over, which and limit their ability to serve their customers directly, including, I don't want to get that far into it, but including to the point where like certain airlines can't fly to certain locations because it would be illegal for them to do it without first stopping in some other state. So like it used to be Southwest would have to fly to somewhere in Texas before they flew anywhere else. Because of the way that the federal regulations ran, which of course is going to hurt the consumer when you do that. Okay, so let's talk about liability. So here's the thing. Let's say that David Dow sues United Airlines. One of the things that happens in a trial is that during the damages phase, the jury will end up assigning a percentage of liability to whatever party's being sued. So if they look at it and they look at all the evidence here that, it was the Chicago officers, they might say, you know what, United Airlines, you actually are partially responsible because you called the police officers rather than exhausting some other means. And maybe they didn't exhaust all their other means. They could have, and then that was sort of the only option left. You called these security officers without exhausting your other means. We're going to hold you 20% liable or 10% liable for what's there. That means that whatever damages the jury awards, the plaintiff only gets that percentage. And a lot of people don't know that that's what happens in a civil court is they can assign percentages. So like, if you win a $2 million settlement because McDonald's coffee was too hot, and the jury says, well, McDonald's is only 50% liable because it was you that spilled it on your lap. And a lot of people don't know this about that McDonald's coffee case. Well, then the amount awarded is 50% of the total damages that the jury has decided on. So the plaintiff gets 50% of whatever that is, and the other 50% is their responsibility, so they just don't get it, or it's some other party's responsibility. So if he were to sue anyone, he should sue the whatever the city of Chicago or whoever runs this little aviation security force or whatever it is, the aviation officers. That's the people they should sue, because a jury would see that and be like, oh yeah, they're the ones who hit him, they're the ones that dragged him out, they're the ones that used the force. We're going to say that they are 90% liable for the damages that's there. Or they might say they're 50% liable because the other 50% is the airline calling security and him refusing to get out of his seat, and then he only gets 50%. So even if there was like a large reward, my point is it could still be reduced to something very small and not make as much of an impact as you think. But the headline's going to read, $1 million settlement against United Airlines, and then you see, oh well, the jury found that United Airlines 5% liable, so it's actually only $50,000 judgment or something like that. So that is something that you guys should be aware of too when it comes to this sort of liabilities. That even if United Airlines has some amount of liability, like it won't be 100%. and not when you know all the facts of what's going on here. Anyway, I thought this was a great exercise in how the narrative ends up sort of controlling the way people think about things, and how just a little bit of information people can just fill in all the gaps and write a story where it's thugs from United Airlines beating up a poor old grandpa, rather than Chicago aviation officers, basically police officers, having to use force to remove a belligerent convicted drug trafficker. which would be the other way that you would write the story. So you guys have a great one. I'll see you next time. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and give me your thoughts on this, because I'm super happy to hear them, even if I can't always comment. I am going to be gone for a week, I think, starting next week. So if you see sparse content, that's probably gonna be why. I'll be on vacation, but I'll hopefully be able to check comments and stuff as I go. I may not have that much opportunity to check comments in the next couple days because stuff that's going on in my life, but I'll do my best. That's the best that I can give you. I really appreciate it if you guys buy my books. I see that people buy them, and that makes me really, really happy, not just because Amazon pays me money, but also because that means that my thoughts and my ideas and the things that I really treasure about my own personal experience are out in the world, and that you're able to experience those stories and hopefully get a little bit of fun and joy out of them too, as much as I had fun writing them. So you guys have a great day. I will see you next time.